Welcome, Immortalites, to another round of the conversations. Today, I have the founder of Fountain FM, contributor to enhancing podcasting through Podcasting 2.0, and even coming into Xmas, the jolliest of us all, is Oscar Merry. Welcome.
Hey, Kyrin, great to be here. Great to be here.
Do you ever get name-related puns in your day-to-day life with the merry part?
I do, yeah. Sometimes at Christmas I do, but not as much as you'd expect, actually. Yeah, the occasional one, but not too much.
Because you do you use it the opposite way around for your Twitter handle, right? So it's Merry Oscar. So yeah, I could see that sort of cropping up, particularly around the Christmas time. But all right, that's good to know.
Yeah, that was purely by accident. Just the Oscar Merry handle wasn't available, so I just was trying some random combinations, and that one kind of stuck. But yeah, I like it.
Yeah, I mean, like that's one of the good things. My mum is his name Susan, so she like people her age. There's Susans all around. Our next door neighbor's called Susan. In her chorus, there's like a Sue and two others, and so she's like, my kids are going to have unique names, which has been good in that sense for me, because like all of the things are available for me. Like you'll never struggle to find me SEO wise, because it's like even just my first name Kyrin is pretty much unheard of. But then it's also like the difficulty. No one gets it right the first time. It's always Karen. Like got called Karen once, which was kind of funny. So yeah. I was going to say, man, so we met through, I guess, just the podcasting 2.0 world. I think we probably joined roughly around the same time, because I think I first, looking back, it was probably around episode 30 or 34, 37 something was when they actually played a little bit of us on, and when I say they, I mean Adam and Dave. And I believe you were starting to develop a Fountain FM right around that time. Is that right? So that would probably be around the May, June, July period.
Yeah, so it was a bit earlier than that we started working on Fountain. So I think I'd been listening to Podcasting 2.0 since about January. So it's a bit earlier than that. And that's, when we started thinking about and doing some of the early development, or at least, like ideas around what became Fountain. So, yeah, I was a long time lurker on the show though before getting in touch with any of them. So
for sure. I'm generally a lurker when I go on forums and stuff like that as well. It's just I like to scope it out before I'm willing to commit brain cells or time, energy, effort, whatnot to actually contributing. Do you want to just, people who have listening to us would probably have heard me mention your podcast app many times before, but maybe if you could just give us the small go about it, what it is and maybe what sets it apart from some of the other podcasting apps.
Yeah, for sure. So Fountain is a podcast app, and it does everything that you'd expect a podcast app to do in terms of searching for podcasts, listening to podcasts, following certain podcasts so that new episodes appear in your feed every day. So it's a normal podcast app. The two things that are different about Fountain, though, are number one, you can create and share clips from the podcast that you're listening to. So in the same way that podcasters will create highlights of what they think the best bit of their episodes are, turn those into audiograms and share them on social media, we give the listener that ability through Fountain. And then the second thing that's different about Fountain is you can support your favorite podcast with Bitcoin over the Lightning Network. So you can set a per minute stream value in terms of how much you want to send, or you can send a custom amount through a boost, and you can attach a message to that boost to let the podcaster know your thoughts about the show, whether that's feedback, whether that's a question, or whether that's simply some kind words of thanks. So yeah, that's a high level overview of Fountain.
Nice. I think I should just acknowledge here that I've listened to you on a couple of different ones. believe you've been on Podland, Podcasting 2.0, obviously, for one of those episodes. And then there was a couple that I found as well. This is Bitcoin, and I think it was Kevin Rooks. So you dived really deep into like the mechanics, I guess, behind Fountain FM. So I was going to say maybe we should try and keep it to maybe the psychology, behavior, and even business stuff, because it'd just be a bit more interesting for you and for me to go down that route, and explore some different things there. So I wanted to ask about starting a new project, because it sort of feels like when I start one, it's almost like I have to be all in right away. So when I start a podcast, it's like, all right, I have the expectation that this is what I'm going to be doing solidly for like, at least the next year, and really going hard at it. Do you have a similar hesitation or any expectations starting the project? What was, I guess, like the feeling when you were starting it? Was this going to be like, I'm going all in, or it's, a fun little thing on the side?
Yeah, great question. I think probably there was a bit of both. I think the biggest thing for me and for us at the start of this year, when we were just starting with Fountain, was experimentation. So we spent a good few months just experimenting with technology, experimenting with design, and just thinking about what the app might look like. And at that stage, we had no expectation of what was going to happen. It was purely an experiment. So yeah, it was only much later that we kind of realized, okay, there is something here. So yeah, I think at the start, and I think I take this approach with anything that I'm doing. At the start, it's always an experiment. And you need to do it that way, because you need to build conviction in what you're doing. Otherwise, it will be too easy to give up. If you don't have conviction in what you're doing, you're probably not going to do it for the long term. And I think it's very rare that we have an idea and the conviction comes along with the idea at the same time. So yeah, I'm not sure if that answered your question, but yeah, a lot of experimentation at the beginning without expectation of anything actually happening.
Yeah. And what, I guess, got you to the point where it was maybe the conviction starts to come in, where you're thinking like, oh, okay, what was it that triggered like, hey, I'm going to start taking this more seriously than perhaps you were right at the start?
Yeah, I think two things. One, so we started with the clipping. That was really the key thing we were doing with Fountain.
So that's you and Nick, is it?
Yeah, me and Nick, my business partner. So we started out purely with the question, how can we make it easier to discover the best insights from podcasts? Like for me, I just have too many podcasts in my feed every day, and I want to listen to all of them, but I can't, obviously. And it's like, how do you find those insights? And so that was the thing that we were thinking about. And we had seen some of the some other tools like Descript for podcast editing basically flip the editing process into text, and we were like, well, maybe there's something there. But this was all just an experiment. I think one moment where we thought, yes, okay, there's something here, is the first time that you hear a clip that's been created by, in this case, it was just Nick. He created a clip. I think it was around something to do with sport, because he's really into sport. He listens to a lot of sport podcasts, whereas I don't at all. I'm into sport, but I'm just not that interested in terms of listening to a podcast. And he created this clip from, I think it was a football podcast. And it was just fascinating for me, because it was a window into what he was interested into. It was a window into that area of the world. And I think that was one moment where I was like, okay, this is actually like, that was a great experience for me to listen to that. So that was one example where like, okay, there is something here. If we can make it easier for people to create clips, there is something here. So yeah, that was definitely one moment. And then obviously another moment was seeing the Lightning payments, seeing the value for value model working, and seeing the growth of the Lightning network outside of the podcasting 2.0 space, that was very much, okay, this is something that's happening, not just within podcasting, this is happening all over the world. This is happening all over the internet. This is going to be ingrained in all digital technology going forward. So that was another, I guess, building block of the conviction.
Yeah, I totally resonate with that one, because that's what got me finally interested in just the crypto and blockchain technologies in general. I think I'd bought some Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Litecoin back in 2017 sometime, and just held it for ages, not really doing anything with it. It was sort of just sitting there. Of course, did the stupid thing, sold it right around just after the pandemic, because I was like, look at all these stocks crashing. Like, this is the perfect opportunity to buy some of something I know 100% is going to go back up. And then, of course, in the same time that those stocks doubled, the crypto stuff like quadrupled. But that feeling, that excitement, what convinced me to start getting interested in crypto again was, holy shit, like I can use this with podcasting. I can send someone a message. Like, this is unbelievable. This is the coolest stuff. And hence why I binged podcasting 2.0 over a week, and I had to catch up like 40 something episodes, but I just smashed it down because that was the big thing for me as well. I was going to then ask, I guess, that intersection between podcasting and the cryptocurrencies. I think I heard you mention before that you were interested in crypto as well. So you're already sort of primed for it. Is that right?
Yeah. So I got introduced to Bitcoin relatively early, which was in, I think it was towards the end of 2013. And I did actually get a little bit of Bitcoin back then, and then I just ignored it for years. But around the 2017 timeframe, I started to really dig into Bitcoin more, try and understand it more. And I understood it from the perspective of a global monetary system that would be much better for the world than the current system. And so since then, what's that, 4 years? Over the past 4 years, I've been becoming more and more interested in Bitcoin, investing in it more, really just becoming more excited about it. And I didn't necessarily think that I would ever work in that industry or do anything to do with programming on Bitcoin. And so it was a great combination of the two things that I was most interested in. Number one being audio and podcasts, in terms of how can you learn from these amazing people around the world by listening to them. And number two, Bitcoin. So yeah, it was a great combination of those two interests.
Yeah, definitely. You were saying just audio then, and I was scoping out your LinkedIn. You were working with audio stuff before you did Fountain, right? Like, what were you doing particularly with that company?
Yeah, so I had a previous business that was working in the voice space. So we started as a digital agency and then moved to more of a studio model. But basically what we were doing was building apps for the Amazon Alexa and Google Assistant platform. So designing and building voice applications that you would just interact with purely through your voice. And obviously, a big part of that is the audio response that you get back from that voice assistant. So I guess, even though it wasn't within podcasting, I had a lot of exposure to the power of audio to, affect people or deliver value.
Yeah. And I guess the construction of apps is really fascinating because it's so hard, I imagine, to really get people to switch from something. So if it's like a completely new thing, I could understand how that might capture a new market. Like even if it's a new game, like games are sort of cyclical and you can find new ones, but there's only 16 spaces on my home screen of the phone, and completely convincing someone to change that to your one must be like insanely difficult. So I guess what makes a stellar app, and you can address this in many ways, but is it something unique? Like, is it the marketing, the technical design, UI? Where do you focus on when you're trying to make something, I guess, stellar that can convince someone to switch out?
Yeah, I think the number one thing is having something unique that your app does that others don't. Because fundamentally, if you're asking somebody to switch apps when for something that is a commodity like a podcast app, it's really difficult to do that. So having something unique is really important. And then the second thing is just the user experience. So having the best design possible, the best actual flows between screens possible. And that's a really difficult thing to do. I think we're definitely still not quite there yet on Fountain. Like we think we've done a great job with the design, but we know it could be so much better. So we're working hard on that.
Yeah, in your day-to-day, I imagine you have to fight lots of things. So like I've been using Fountain a lot, and so I always find little mini bugs here and there. Sometimes you can't see the text when you're trying to send a boostergram. Sometimes you can't clip this additional thing. How much of that time do you spend, fighting the day-to-day fires of bugs and small little changes versus really trying to go for that, really enhancing that special thing that it is that you do best?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say because we're so early, so we launched Fountain on iOS and Android at the end of July. So that's, just over 3 months. So we haven't actually been live that long. And I think when you're so early, I think a massive part of it is rewarding the people that have taken a punt on using your app at the start. So we actually have spent a lot of time addressing the very small bugs and the features that people have requested. If you look at the last 4 or 5 releases, most of the features in there were user requested, or if there's a bunch of bug fixes, like they're all things that people have requested. So we track every piece of feedback, every feature request we track, and we basically organize our release schedule based on that. So it's really, really important for us, and we try and prioritize it. I think we're in the long term, like we have some other things that we're working on that are more our own ideas. But I think if you don't deliver the basics, people are not going to stick around with your app. And there's so much to do there because podcast apps are a commodity, and because people already use podcast apps and know what they like. You have to deliver on the basics. And I think we've done an okay job of that, but we're going to continue to make sure that every single piece of feedback that we've had is something that we address and deliver.
Yeah. I've heard this one asked of you before, but I'll spin it slightly different, which is, what do you imagine in the future? Like, where would you like to see Fountain in let's just say maybe 5 years' time? Is it going to be, the Spotify or like, the Google level type app where it's in everyone's phone, and if it's not in their phone, they've heard of it? Or are you aiming for maybe something more niche? Is it more designed for podcasters? For example, I use it a lot because I can create those clips and share it. But would you prefer that it was less podcasters like me sharing it and more audience people? And what would you then change in your app to maybe accommodate those different things?
Yeah, I think right now, the majority of the people using Fountain and using Fountain as their daily podcast app are using it because they're an early adopter. Either they're an early adopter in podcasting, or they're an early adopter in Bitcoin or Lightning. And I think we do really want to get to the point where, just it's more of a general audience that are using Fountain. I think we've got the starting point of that with the features we have, but the fundamental truth is that it's too difficult from a UX standpoint to do the core things that we have in Fountain. So the two core things are creating and sharing clips and supporting your favorite podcast with Bitcoin. And both of those have UX challenges that need to be addressed before we go mainstream. So with the clipping, the transcription takes too long. And with the supporting with Bitcoin, to get Bitcoin into Fountain as a brand new user, it's just too difficult. So yeah, we definitely have ambitions to be a podcast app that is used widely. We want to be up there with the big tech giants in terms of market share. But we know that with the app in its current state, we're not there yet. So it's going to take a lot of product development and improvement to get there. But that's definitely our ambition.
Yeah. Okay. So that would, I guess, require you to become more a CEO at some point, because if you're trying to get that big, that's when you have, I guess, all the other stuff. Although I've heard, I've never used Overcast myself because I don't have iOS, but that app's it's pretty big, right? And it's just a one-man band over there, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Overcast. I actually used Overcast before using Fountain, and yeah, it's an incredible app, and I believe it's just Marco doing that. So yeah, I think we can definitely, we're a small team. I don't think we need to grow in the team size to solve some of the problems that I've talked about. It's just going to take time. And yeah, I think because we're so focused on fixing the bugs that our users are reporting and building the features that they want, we haven't had as much time to solve some of those bigger challenges that we know need solving. But I do believe that we have to do the basics right first. If we had an amazing instant clipping ability that had no transcription delay, and we'd improve the UX even more in terms of creating those clips. If there's bugs around the core podcast listening experience, or for example, if we don't have a sleep timer or OPML import, which was one of the things we did in the last release, all of these fancy new features don't really matter. Like, you have to do the basics right. So we've been quite focused on that over the past few months.
Yeah. Do you have like a core philosophy or any maxims that you follow when you're deciding what to do with your time? As in, where should I spend my time this day versus, quarter? I don't know if you have meetings with Nick as well as what should we be focusing on for this time period versus, this time period?
Yeah, good question. I think it's always a challenge to prioritize different features. Like we have a backlog of different features, some of which are requested by users and some of which are our own internal ideas. I think if I had any philosophy or maxim, it would be make sure that you're looking after your users and doing what they've asked of you. That's more important to me than creating a brand new feature, because our early users, the people that are in the first couple of hundreds, they deserve to have their issues addressed and addressed quickly. So that's definitely the highest priority for me, is if you've reported a bug on Fountain, we should fix it, and we should fix it quickly. Or if you've requested a feature that's not too difficult for us to build and is not going to take too long, we should build that, and we should build it sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Okay. With regards to choices as well, like I'm really fascinated with the way people do things differently and how they make their choices. How much do you decide on what to do based on your own behavior and something that you think you would make that same choice versus trying to, I don't know, guess or predict or even measure what other people want?
Yeah, great question. I actually think a lot of it at the start and even now was down to my own behavior, because fundamentally, when we set out to build out the listener experience, as I said, I came from Overcast, which is an amazing podcast app. It's got loads of advanced features that you don't see in Apple Podcasts or Spotify, for example. So I did very much come from okay, I'm an Overcast user right now. What would I need to see in Fountain to make me switch? And just, go down the list of features and implement them. So yeah, I do think a lot of it does come from myself and Nick, what we want to see in a podcast app and our own frustrations. We're just the same as anyone else who listens to podcasts. We have our commute into the office. We have our, maybe Saturday or Sunday walks in the park where we listen to a podcast. And it's just about, in those moments, trying to pay attention to the little frustrations and thinking about them and actually addressing them.
Yeah. And I guess trying to solve them all as well can be a trap, because I'm just trying to think of when I was pretty much using Spotify exclusively, and the reason for that was actually very similar to something that you've addressed, which is on the phone, I would want to share directly to my Instagram stories, because I was doing like lots of shout outs to other podcasters, one as a way of sort of getting my own name in front of them, saying like, hey, this person actually listened to you, Kyrin listened to you, enjoyed what you had, here's some feedback, etc. And Spotify was basically the only one where I could share to the stories directly one of the episodes, or like a link to it, and it'll come up with like the little artwork and stuff. And it was just that one thing that was super easy. But I actually really didn't enjoy Spotify that much. I used to always be frustrated with the lack of, like, when I created a playlist, it would do this thing, or when I wouldn't be able to do this. And then jumping on to all the other apps, and now I use probably like 4 or 5 different ones. I use yours for a certain subsection of podcasts. I use Podfriend for some others, because then I can, it's just got like different little things, which makes it easier for me, depending on if it's a small one, or if it's like a regular one I go to, or if I'm leaving a comment or something like that. So I imagine not trying to do everything as well would be on your mind as well, like not trying to please everyone, because you'll please no one if you do that.
Yeah, it's always a challenge, because when you're starting something, I think that you do have to go one by one. So you literally have to find one person and show them the app, give them the app, and ask their feedback. What's wrong with it? What would make you not switch from Spotify or Apple, and literally just address that one by one. But obviously there does get to a point where you have too many people requesting too many niche things. So it is a challenge, but I think we're still early enough where if anybody reports feedback that we should just address it.
Yeah, I was going to say, you only have so many mums, dads, friends who you can sort of foist it upon.
Yeah.
With the choices as well, what makes... I'll come back to that, because I don't have the best way of putting it. When you're designing it as well, your own choices, how do you know if it's a choice that is going to last as well? Because sometimes you can just go through phases of like, I really like this playlist or something, like I'm going to add that in, and then maybe in a while you realize like, I didn't actually really need that. It was just a short-term thing versus something that's really going to stick around for a long time.
Yeah, that's a great point, because they do fall into 2 categories in terms of the features that we build. Some features are almost like side features that you can be very quick, and you can just get something out there really quickly to test and see whether people like it. Whereas other features are so critical to the app and the experience that you have to be a lot more thoughtful in, if you're making a design change or if you're changing the way things work. So I think a good example there would be the player. So the actual player screen that everybody's familiar with, that's something that you have to be really careful in changing, and you have to be really thoughtful about how you structure the layout, because number one, the player screen is something that is shared across many, many apps. So people already have that expectation about how it works. So if you were to come along with a design that is completely different, it's going to frustrate and upset a lot of people. So that's an example where you have to be really thoughtful about any change. On the other hand, a great example of a feature that we can be more experimental with is we introduced a feature called show lists, which allows you to create custom episode feeds based on different podcasts. So you might have, for example, I have a podcasting show list, which has all of my episodes that are to do with podcasting. And you can create those show lists based on any topic that you like. That's something where, because it's not a feature that exists in every podcast app, and because it's something that doesn't exist within that core flow in the app, it's something that we can be a little bit more experimental with. We can be quicker in getting a design out there. And if the design doesn't work, then we can change it. So yeah, there's definitely that difference in terms of features that you have to be more thoughtful about versus just quickly getting something out there.
For sure. And yeah, there must be so many considerations of, how obvious should I make the wallet function, and then all the things that you can do in there, and how deep do you want to lead someone in the tree of networks of clicking buttons and getting them. Yeah. So many choices.
Yeah. And yeah, exactly. And I think with the wallet's another great example. I mean, part of the reason we put it in the menu, not directly on the bottom nav, was because we were scared that Apple would reject the app when we first submitted it to them. So that's part of the reason why we put it in the menu, just to kind of hide it away from the Apple reviewers. But I think we're past that point, so we might actually try and bring it more into the main experience for users, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's funny. How did they do their process of review? I've heard other people talk about the concern about it getting rejected. Are they just don't have time to click on the menu and see that it's there? I mean, it's like the same function, but
yeah, I'm not sure, to be honest. It's a bit of a black box in terms of the review process. But yeah, it can be very different each time. I think it's different people that will review the app each time, and it will depend on how detailed they want to go. So sometimes we have really in-depth feedback about things that Apple think that we need to address, and other times it will just go straight through in a day and we won't have anything. So yeah, it's very variable.
Yeah, that's super frustrating when you have no idea and you're just going blind. It's almost like when you start off a podcast and you just have no viewership, so you have no idea if your product's really crap and no one's listening because it's really crap, or no one's had time to find it. You've had no time to refine it as well. And so then you're just stuck doing the sort of same thing because you're like, this could be good or it could be bad. I just have no idea.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting what you said about the difference between YouTube and podcast, whereby on YouTube, you can put a video out and it will actually grow over time without you really doing anything, as opposed to on podcasts where once the initial kind of promotion has happened, or the initial listening for that episode, it tends to not do that. Yeah, I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, well, I wonder, it's jumping into podcasting 2.0 was so cool because that's the first time I've ever really seen a way where I could imagine that YouTube would no longer exist, or YouTube would no longer be the one thing that you go to. And so that, I mean, if that sort of thing came to podcasting, and that's what I'm really, really hoping with the cross-app comments and the ability to go live and those sorts of things. I personally would even say that the cross-app comments would be like the main thing, because I think we both talked about this recently where we stopped watching Joe Rogan because you couldn't get the comments anymore. And that was probably the most valuable thing. And the reason still why I watch like the Lex Fridman podcast and other ones on, I even listen/watch Tim Ferriss's on YouTube because it has comments, and half the time he doesn't even have video, but there's still a lot of value just within that.
Exactly. Yeah. Sometimes the most valuable thing about a piece of content is somebody else's perspective on it, as opposed to the actual original piece of content. And yeah, with podcasts, there's not really a way to do that in the app at the moment.
Yeah, which is why I like your clipping features. I've been using them. I'm in a weird stage now where I'm sort of getting rid of Instagram, and I'm not really using that so much as I used to, and starting to use more Twitter and Discord. And so I'm in this weird phase where I'm like not really sharing anything, whereas I used to just spam stuff. So I do actually need to start doing that. And I think that's a good thing about Twitter is like you can share anything to Twitter from basically anywhere. So I won't have that same problem where I was stuck with Spotify because they just had that one thing where no one else could do it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I think it was so important for us to allow the sharing externally, because it kind of comes back to this open platform versus closed platform. And we don't want to have to be in a situation where we have to recreate everybody's follower networks and follower graphs. You know, you already have the conversation is already happening on Twitter. The conversation is already happening in your Discord, for example. Like, we shouldn't have to ask you to move that entire conversation into Fountain necessarily. We should give you that option eventually, but you should be able to share the clips from Fountain wherever the conversation is already happening. And that tends to be, Twitter, Discord, other spaces. So that was really important for us. And I think the clip sharing on Twitter specifically has done really well. Like some of the clips that we have shared ourselves, or I've shared, or other people have shared as well, anecdotally have done really well in terms of the reach that they've got compared to other, for example, if you shared a link, because the algorithms of all these social media platforms reward video as well.
Yeah.
So, and native video. So yeah, I think that's been it's been really well received.
Can you share those clips to Discord? I haven't tried that before.
Yeah, you should be able to. So we allow you to share the clips either just as an MP3 file or as the video export.
Yeah.
And we're working on links as well, just to be able to share a web link. But I think, it's nice to have a native format in the actual platform that you're using.
Definitely. Okay, cool. Maybe jumping on to maybe a bit more of the Bitcoin and value for value, which is tied up with that. I was going to ask about the wallet. And so you were saying, at the moment it's really hard because, well, one, if someone's never heard of Bitcoin, it's not like they can do it all in your app. They need to probably use at least two other places, really, maybe one, to buy it, send it over. But there is, I've just seen in the past 6 months, the amount of apps, the amount of ways, and just even sinking into real life, like seeing advertisements on the street for random crypto stuff, for hearing the guy at like while out to dinner talking about how he lost that 1.5 Bitcoin the other, a year or two ago. Do you ever see yourself going full down that route, or do you think the other tech and the other people will just be able to know enough that they can then send Bitcoin onto Fountain? Will you ever need to be, buying it directly on Fountain? Do you want to go that far?
Yeah, I think I would love to be able to offer the ability for Fountain users to buy Bitcoin directly within the app. I think that would be great for brand new users that have never heard of Bitcoin before. I think that's one of the really exciting things about this use case of value for value in podcasting 2.0 is that actually you don't care that it's Bitcoin. All you care about is the fact that you can now support your favorite podcasters in this really cool new way, per minute, and send a message that they're going to see. So I almost think, despite my personal view, which is Bitcoin is incredible and it's going to change the world in terms of the monetary system, I almost think for Fountain, we don't even need to see Bitcoin in there. So I'd love people to be able to buy Bitcoin in the app. The problem is the regulatory restrictions that most countries have around doing that makes it very difficult for us to offer that. Because, for example, if you buy Bitcoin through an exchange, you'll have to go through KYC. You'll have to, put in all of your personal details, maybe upload a photo of your passport or driving license. You shouldn't have to do that to use a podcast app. Like, that's ridiculous. So yeah, we'd love to have that ability, but it's complicated with the regulatory burden.
Yeah. You were just saying it could just be a token, and it's not even the Bitcoin that necessarily people are seeing when they're doing that. Would that then make sense that perhaps some of the other cryptocurrencies would be better suited for this rather than Bitcoin? Because I mean, the Lightning Network's got lots of advantages, but there could be another one which is, the perfect use case for podcasting, because it's super quick, have even less transaction fees. You don't have to, you'll probably still have to do KYC for the moment with the regulations and whatnot, but maybe just even the tech behind it would be more suited for this application of streaming and boostergramming.
No, I don't think so. My personal view is that Bitcoin is the future of the global monetary system, and it doesn't make sense to have another currency or another monetary system running alongside it. I think, Bitcoin will be the only monetary currency that people use in the future, and I think there are a lot of challenges with it in terms of UX and onboarding. I think they will get solved. And the great thing is, it's not just us solving them. Everybody's trying to solve them in every single industry, in every single vertical. So I think it will be Bitcoin. I think it will be over the Lightning Network. And I think, it's my personal view that a lot of the other cryptocurrencies will just die out and you won't see them in a few years' time. But yeah, that's just my personal view.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely going to be a probably another crypto winter coming soon. I was just wondering more. I mean, there's obviously a lot of stuff required because the Lightning addresses are being handled by Dave at the Podcasting Index, the Podcaster Wallet. There would be so much that would be required to go into it. It's just, would it be better? Let's just say that other cryptocurrencies do have the still monetary benefits, I guess. So, Bitcoin has a real strong case for being why it should be the only one. And I totally get that. But I'm just wondering if the use case of others could just be so much more applicable to what you're trying to do with the value sending, that they might form their own little community, I guess, in the podcasting world. Yeah.
Well, I think the good thing about the podcasting 2.0 standard, including the value block, is that it is open and it does actually allow for different payment methods. So, it's something that if people want to try, they can try that with the standard. So that's the great thing about this open standard. It's not just one company that's making a final decision and saying this is the way we're going to go. It's people are free to experiment with different options.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the beauty of what's also drawn me into it as well. Plus the value for value model, which is, it's so funny, like trying to really dive into it, because it's so exceedingly simple, and in one way, which is you just ask. All you need to do is ask for support and not feel bad about it. But then there's all the nuances, because you can ask, but you could also be asking via Patreon, but that's not particularly value for value, because that's essentially, you're starting to put up a paywall. Then it's not a voluntary. You can't choose the amount. You can't do all these sorts of things. I was recently just listening to Adam talking about how important email is to the whole process of it, because he would send out a a weekly or bi-weekly, twice a week email before the shows reminding everyone like, hey, value for value only works if you contribute to the show, and that would trigger like 30% of the donations of people supporting. So yeah, it's exceedingly simple. And then also when you start looking at it deeply, you're like, oh God, there's so much to do.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why I love your podcast, Value for Value, so much, because you're right. It is such a simple concept, but then the nuance and the detail is actually so complex. And it's something that is really difficult to understand or explain, I think, without examples. So when you talk about that example from Adam, that clarifies things a lot. But without those examples, it's really, really difficult. I think one of the things I'd love to see and learn more about, I think I sent you a boostergram about this as well, which was just seeing how different podcasters ask for value, but also thank people for sending in the value, because I think I'm just really curious to see the different ways that that's possible, and which ways work best for which different podcast formats and things like that. So yeah, I think there's still so much to learn around that.
Yeah, for sure. My video is just stuffing up, so I'm just going to jump to the other camera here. Hopefully this jumps in. I was going to ask about that in particular with, and yeah, that is fascinating because there's so many different ways of doing it. You could, how much of it you need to introduce the feedback into your own show? Can it maybe not even be on the show and you do it somewhere else? Like, yeah, there's so many different things to do there. What particularly about the mix between value for value and advertising, I guess, do you see? So would that come at the expense of advertising or the paywall or, the middlemen of Patreon and places like that? Do you think they can coexist, or does value for value need to dominate in a way?
Yeah, so I think there's two things there. One is, can it coexist with advertising? And then two is, can it coexist with some kind of paywall? So I think they are separate. I think first with the paywall, or premium version of the content, I just personally think that that's a really bad idea for any content creator, because it's just inherently limiting the potential reach of your content and your ideas. And I think that's bad for two reasons. Number one, I think it's bad for the content creator's potential growth in the future. But then number two, I just have a personal belief that the content should be out there for anybody that wants to hear it, that wants to, especially around when you think about podcasting. I mean, most people say they listen to podcasts to learn, which is why I listen to them. And I think to restrict that learning opportunity from people just because they can't afford it, I think is something bad for the world as well. So I think paywalls and restricting content behind a paywall is not a good idea. And I think value for value will replace that. On the advertising part though, my personal view is that advertising is still completely fine for podcasters. And I think value for value will just augment that revenue and add an additional revenue stream as opposed to replacing it. I think we're not quite there yet, both with the technology, the user experience, for your average podcaster to replace their advertising income with value for value payments. I think we'll get there eventually, but right now it's probably not possible unless you're, at the level of experience of somebody like Adam, who, has had years and years and years to perfect the methodology.
Yeah. Do you think how many this is a random question for you, but it's one I always think about, which is my ideas are pretty similar with regards to, I want the podcast to be available anytime, any place, anywhere, anyone can access it. Definitely want to, and I will go out of my way to remove barriers to make sure they can. So like I've pretty much added the podcast to every aggregator service that I could reasonably find in English, and some even not in English. But how many people do you think in terms of podcasters and putting ads in their shows? I'm wondering, like, what do you think would be the amount of people who just feel maybe like a little bit in their gut where it's like, oh, this is kind of gross, but I'm going to do it anyway? Because I wonder if that's just a unique thing to like maybe you and me and well, definitely Adam, which is he goes the full censorship route. I'm most of the way there with him, but I just wonder how many other people feel that way as well. And yeah, just that question about advertising.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do feel that way. I think there's a from what I've seen in talking to podcasters, I think there's a real distinction between ads that have some kind of personal resonance to the things that you care about and generic ads that don't. So, for example, if you had a podcast about surfing, let's say, and you want to get a sponsor or an advertising read from a surfing brand that you've used for over 10 years and you love and you feel is an incredible product and service, like I think that type of advertising people don't really have a problem with. But that building those kind of advertising relationships is incredibly time consuming and difficult to do. And especially if you're just starting out as a podcaster, you're probably not going to be able to do that, especially if you have a small audience. So I think that pushes podcasters to try and, cover their costs or make a little bit of money. It pushes them to the more generic advertising where you're just, picking a random sponsor or a random ad read from, a nutrition bar or, something that doesn't really align with what you're talking about. So I think there's a really big distinction between those two types of ads. I don't know if that resonates with you or if you're more just against it entirely.
Yeah, I get both. Once again, like me personally, I just hate hearing ads in general. I think it's probably something to do with my childhood about TV and just the amount of TV I watched, the amount of random ads that I got. And I actually do remember one time, and this is probably like the most illuminating thing, was there was this toy being advertised when I was a young kid, probably like 6 years old, 7 years old. And it was sort of like a version of Doctor where you had to get your little tweezers and pick the thing out without it buzzing. But it was sort of like a cone-shaped device where it had the little stuff in it and it would just rotate slowly. And each person, they got the chance to pick it out when it was coming near their side. And so it was sort of like a competition. It had all the bells and whistles, lights, and it was like, oh my God, this is so cool. The kids on the ad were having super fun. I bought it and it cost, I think, like $40 or $50 at the time. And I played with it maybe twice. And I just remember my heart sinking when I was like, this is not what it was meant to be. I've been fooled, I've been duped. And I reckon that has probably had a strong impact on my thoughts on advertising as well, for just one really bad experience when young. And I was like, never again.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I do agree with you there. I don't know. I'm trying to think. I think there's an opportunity for, like, in some ads, I have the same experience as you. And when I hear some ads, I'm like, oh my God, this is so. Well, the other thing that is another crazy thing about podcast advertising is, I'm not sure if you have this, but for me, at least with the shows that I listen to regularly that do have ads, I'm so good at skipping the ads that I never hear them. Like, I'll know, okay, this show has 2.5 minutes of ads, so I'll press the forward 30 seconds button 6 times and I'll remember that for every show. So even if they do have ads, I never listen to them. I don't know if you have that experience too.
I do that in Tim Ferriss's. That's why I love the YouTube, because I'll click on it and I'll immediately scroll down to find that one person who's always there, who puts the timestamp for when the ads stop, and it's his intro. Like, that's so automatic in me now. I do that. It's when I listen to a new podcast or have like a friend's one who I'm sort of trying to support. So there's, for example, Learn Cardano podcast, because I've been wanting to learn more about Cardano. There's a guy, Pete, here who I actually just had on yesterday, and he has some ads in, and like I don't know his podcast super well, so it's sort of like it's almost like a shock. It hits me when I hear it. I'm like, oh god, and I don't know how far to skip. I don't know where to skip. Yeah, I'm similar to that, and he's been using some DAI, dynamic ad insertion as well. So it makes it even harder because it could just be anywhere in the podcast.
Yeah, they're the worst. Dynamic ad insertion with a random ad in a random voice that has nothing to do with the podcast. Yeah, they're terrible.
Yeah. I've been meaning to tell him about it as well. Just saying, like, man, I like you, I like your podcast, but damn, that one bit is hard to get past. Do you see yourself with just getting back to Bitcoin and Fountain? Supporting yourself solely through the value for value, so like your cut percentage from that you deserve for creating an amazing app that people want to go to and send Bitcoin through. Do you see yourself supporting yourself mostly through that? I know you also have the option to send it directly just through fiat on a monthly or a yearly basis. Can't remember which one. And then, you also would have the ad option to put in ads or paid sponsorships or, podcasters trying to boost their rankings, so paying directly to you. What do you see for the future of Fountain with regards to that?
Yeah, it's a great question and something that we're still trying to figure out. I think for me personally, because I'm such a believer in Bitcoin, it does make me feel a little bit weird when we add the 5% to the Lightning transactions. So the way we do it for somebody that's not used Fountain is we'll add 5% on top of whatever transactions that you send. And the reason we do that is to maintain the numerology of the, for example, boost. So if you send, 7777 sats, you want the podcaster to see that because it kind of identifies you and maybe there's some special meaning behind it. So yeah, we'll add 5% on top of that as our fee. And then if you want to, you can sign up to Fountain's premium subscription, which is just $2.99 a month. And with that premium subscription, we remove the fees. So I think we're still figuring it out, but I think where I'd like to get to is have more of our users signed up to the premium subscription and not have any fees on the Lightning transactions, because I think part of the reason for Bitcoin and for Lightning is to remove the fees from financial processes that are just sat in the middle. So yeah, that's my current view, but I think we haven't done a good enough job on the premium subscription offering a really good set of additional features and also communicating that in a good way. So yeah, we're still figuring it out. But yeah, that's where we're currently at.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, there's so many trade-offs and not, it's probably better to be getting Bitcoin because it's gonna be worth more in the future. So you'd sort of want that. But then with that other method, it's a bit more reliable in terms of you know what to expect per month. Yeah, there'd be a lot of different things to think about there.
Yeah, exactly. Like one of the things is thinking about, could we make that 5% optional? Like that's more aligned with the value for value ethos is there's no fees on these transactions, but if you want to support Fountain, you can optionally turn on a 5% addition on every transaction. Like that's something we could do that, I think if we communicate it in the right way, it could be something that people just decide, yeah, okay, I'll do that. So there's a few things we're thinking about, but yeah, it's still early on that side.
Yeah, that seems to resonate with what Dave was saying when you were on his, which was give me more options. I want all the things.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, maybe we can just move to some like more personal questions because I didn't hear many of those with before. I saw you work for Accenture, and Juan used to work for Accenture as well. And so there was two things I wanted to ask.
Oh, really?
Well, yeah, one was, did you have in the UK where you had to have a constant promotion? So it was like every 2 years, at least it was here, you had to either get promoted or you got fired. That was the work, or like the company structure that they had here. Is that across the board for Accenture?
No, we didn't have that. Like there was no mandate in terms of, yeah, you either get promoted after a certain time or you leave. I didn't actually work there for that long. I only worked there for just under 2 years. So I wasn't too familiar with it. But yeah, I'm pretty sure there wasn't any mandate like that.
Yeah, gotcha. And the other thing that I seem to have gotten from one was just crazy contracting stories because the contracting world seems bananas, and the amount of like money and almost recklessness that seems to go with that. Was that also similar to your experience with them and where you worked?
I think it was definitely, how do I put this? It was definitely just a crazy experience seeing how some of these big IT projects actually work. Like these are IT projects where the budget is like, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions. And when you're trying to do software development at that scale, with multiple companies involved and maybe multiple companies that aren't technical by nature, it's an incredibly complicated thing to do. And the incentives are all over the place, and the technology that ends up being used isn't always necessarily the best technology because there's just so many other incentives that are involved. So yeah, it was definitely a fascinating thing to be involved with and to see. I guess I'm very grateful that I'm now working in an area of technology where the bureaucracy and the all of the things that come along with those big projects is not there anymore, because it's just much more fun, to be honest.
That was a question Juan had. What's the biggest, I guess, like difference, and do you enjoy it more being a sole trader, everything's on you, versus working in one of these behemoth corporations?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference is speed. If you want to try something, you can spec out the design, build a prototype, and launch it within a week. Whereas in a big company, it's going to take weeks and weeks, if not months and months, to formalize and make decisions around design or architecture or rollout schedule, all of these things. It's just time. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I barely got to experience the normal working life. Like I did 3 years with Rio Tinto, and it's so funny. Like I was in, working in the mines. So it's 97, 98% guy workforce, male workforce. So there's like the office politicking is more manageable, I would say, in a way for me, which was just, didn't have the sexual female influence in there, didn't have the maybe more gossiping type nature. But even that bureaucracy was like too much for me, man. I one of the big reasons why I don't work in a big company now is just I couldn't deal with it.
Yeah, I definitely think it comes down to people's personalities, because some people don't mind that, whereas maybe other, like for me, I think a big part of my personality, for better or for worse, is a certain impatience to get things done, and I think that doesn't fit in a big company with a big bureaucracy.
Gotcha. I saw you were an army cadet as well. What's the army bureaucracy like compared to like a company one?
Um, yeah, good question. I don't think I really experienced any bureaucracy really because that was just during university. But it was an amazing experience. I definitely think, especially I grew up in London in the UK, so I didn't really get out into the countryside or anything like that when I was growing up. So to go um, through that training and get out into
So
all kinds of different
what would you do
places.
for that? What's entailed with that?
So we would do some kind of training on a weekly basis, just in the evenings, whether that was theory or all kinds of different things really. And then we would do these longer training sessions on weekends or over the break period, where we would go and do essentially exercises on whether it was on army bases or just in the in the countryside around the UK. And we just did, yeah, it was just normal military training really. But it was a great experience. Really enjoyed it. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. Uh, with Fountain, what would you say has been like the biggest difficulties you've had whilst creating it? Either for the business, for yourself, personal. Take it wherever you want.
I think the most difficult thing has been the frustrations around certain either bugs that we've had in the app or things that are frustrating our users. Like one example is the audio library that we've had sometimes causes an error. I'm sure you've probably seen them. We've actually fixed it now, but for a long time it was causing errors. And just knowing that people are going through the same frustrations as you and not having fixed it, like for me personally, that was always quite difficult to deal with. You'd be out on a Saturday listening to a podcast and you see an error, and that there's potentially hundreds of other people sharing that same frustration that you're sharing, and knowing that you're not doing a good enough job and you need to fix that, but it's not. That has been really difficult in terms of trying to avoid like feeling bad about that. But I'm glad we've finally fixed some of those bigger issues. That's been the biggest challenge, to be honest.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. With the I suppose Fountain experience and everything you're trying to get there, what's the most exciting thing that you're having and finding whilst doing this whole process?
I think it's just the um I think it's just the feeling that you get as both a listener and a podcaster. I've obviously heard this anecdotally, but the experience, the feeling you get when you send a boost message to a podcaster, or as a podcaster when you receive one, I think it's just a great feeling. And it has surprised us how impactful that can actually be. And I never thought that it would be as beneficial to the listener. I thought this was all about, the podcaster receiving Bitcoin and the podcaster receiving the message. But I think it's been really fascinating, the fact that the effect it has on me as the listener, being able to actually communicate with that podcast in a way where I know they're probably going to read the message because it is attached to a financial value. That's been really interesting, and I've really personally just enjoyed doing that as a podcast listener, like the ability to at any point just pull up the player and just send a message. I've really enjoyed that, and I think it shows that we are, as I've said, even though it's still early, we are actually pushing podcasting forward and enabling new interactions that weren't possible before.
Yeah, one of my favorite moments was when I started the podcast, and we were obviously not taking it, we're just not as refined as we are now, and even not schedule wise, we're just doing it once a week. And we looked one time and saw that someone had left a review on iTunes. Just someone randomly in some part of the world was just like, I like this podcast, good work guys, something like that. And that was huge. Like that just felt really, really good. And it doesn't really mean anything in terms of helping us get promoted more on iTunes. People think it does, but it really doesn't unless you're being very strategic about it. The thing about it was just so random, unexpected, and it came from nowhere. And we honestly were like lucky to see it, because how often do you really go look at your iTunes ratings? It's not that often. There's no ways for you to get like a ping saying, hey, you've got this, unless you're signed up for like 5 different services and Chartable and all sorts of things. So yeah, me being able to send those messages I used to do this just giving random iTunes reviews to podcasts that I listen to. Yeah, the Boostergram is the best. It's what's kept me around for sure, because it's just so, like, I love the chapters. I love some of the other abilities. I'm really hoping cross-app comments are what I imagine they'll be, but the Boostergrams are the coolest thing out.
Yeah, 100%. Same for me. Yeah, I love sending them. I love seeing podcasters share them and seeing the excitement that they get as well. And it's incredible that despite all of the challenges in actually getting set up and sending them, and all of the challenges for podcasters to actually receive them and see them as well, like that's one of the interesting things in the Bitcoin podcast space, is that a lot of Bitcoin podcasts have the Lightning address in their RSS feed, but they're not seeing the messages because they just have their own Lightning node set up that can't pass the TRV records.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's amazing in despite of that people are still using them so much.
That's one of the my benefits of being like not technologically minded, was I was pretty much forced to use Satoshi Stream. And so I knew from the get-go what it could actually do and how impactful that was. And that's just because like I don't have the technical knowledge to run a node, to do any coding, to, maybe now because I've hung around long enough, I could probably work it out. But from coming in fresh, it was like, yeah, okay, cool. You just do this thing and this works. And it's like, awesome. The last thing I wanted to ask you about was books as well. Do you have any favorite books? Do you read much?
Yeah, I do read quite a bit, actually. My favorite book is a bit of a strange one, but my favorite book is called Nathaniel's Nutmeg. And it's a story, a kind of like semi-fictional story about the spice wars in the 1600s. These were the wars between England and Holland over these remote islands in Indonesia that produce spices like nutmeg and cloves. And at the time, these spices were some of the most valuable things in the world, because they were used in medicine and people believed that they had all of these health benefits. And so this story is about this guy who kind of travels on a ship during the spice wars, and he goes over to one of these islands. And it's just, one, it's an amazing story. It's a great novel. But two, it's an amazing window into the history of the world and what was going on at that time. So yeah, that book is my favorite probably, and one that I regularly reread. I'm trying to think if there are any others.
Who's that by?
That's a great one.
Out of interest.
Who's that by? Let me look it up quickly. Giles Milton.
Okay. I have the feeling I've heard of it before, but maybe just like a one-off, someone telling me about it or reading it somewhere. But the name sounds familiar.
Mm. Yeah, it's actually listed as non-fiction here. So I think it is based on a true story. But when you're reading it, it feels like a novel, because it's very much done from the perspective of the characters, and there's dialogue and things like that.
Gotcha. Okay, awesome. Fantastic, man. Thanks so much for jumping on. It was fascinating to learn more and to learn more about you as well, one of the people behind Fountain. It's always nice getting that little bit of a personal touch. If you wanted to send people anywhere, or connect with you, or wherever it is that you want to send people, what's the best place to go?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, Kyrin. Really enjoyed the conversation. I think for anyone listening who hasn't tried out Fountain, I'd really appreciate it if you did. You can go to fountain.fm and you can download the app on iOS or Android. It's live on both. And yeah, if you want to, if you have any feedback about the app, or as I said previously, you know, if you if you share some feedback, if you share a feature request, we'll build it for you. So just send me an email, oscar@fountain.fm, if you have any feedback. And yeah, would really appreciate people downloading it and checking it out.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on. And yeah, keen to see where Fountain will go in the future.